Okay, okay, this is the Real English Party online afternoon book club, and we are reading part three of the chapter. I forgot what number chapter it is, but the book is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. Now, I can do a brief review of everything that we have read so far. However, Uh, the recordings can be found on my previous event pages, so please do check the Real English Party online, realenglishparty.com. You can go to the events. You can find the Real English Party afternoon, a Tuesday afternoon book club. And in the previous events, if you go back on the calendar, you can find the previous readings and catch up on this story. Just so that you know, in this chapter we are reading, our hero, Charlie, has taken on responsibilities for Mr. Bowditch, an old man who is in the hospital. Those responsibilities are to take care of his dog, Radar, and he has decided of himself to clean up the house a bit and do some repairs. And of course, he is basically the main contact for Mr. Bowditch for the hospital. And the hospital, therefore, has contacted him to make sure that he can help Mr. Bowditch when he returns home, because Mr. Bowditch is not really able to walk and not able to manage things for himself, but he won't be for those first few days. And so he has agreed to do that. His father was a little concerned about it, of especially since he had had to take care of his father back when his father was suffering from alcoholism, and well, no one ever stopped suffering from it. But he had gotten sober, so he's okay now. But he kind of felt guilty and thought that his son was taking on these responsibilities because he was just in the habit of taking care of adults. And in the event, the father had decided to look into Mr. Bowditch because the father has resources as an insurance adjuster. He is able to look at people's histories, at least the history of ownership, and he's discovered that Mr. Bowditch, someone is the owner of Mr. Bowditch's house with the initials. I forgot what the initials were, but we're not quite sure if that's his grandfather or his father, because it's been in the family line for several decades. And aside from that, the father seems to say that Mr. Bowditch is a mystery. There's just no information about him. He is simply not of not there's no he has no records. He's not on the grid, as they said. They have no information about him. They know that he owns a car, but as far as they can tell, he does not have a driver's license and this kind of thing. So the father had told Charlie about that, and those were some concerns that Charlie had. And as we go into part three, we are just finishing that conversation and now moving on to the next scene. Okay, so let us begin. Let me close my window so I can see things more clearly. Okay, that will do nicely. All right, and to begin with section 3. I was still thinking about those things as I took the plastic dust cover off the bed in the guest room where I'd sleep during part of spring vacation, or even, maybe even all of it. That bed was made up, but the sheets had a stale and musty smell. I took them off and put on fresh from the linen closet. How fresh, I didn't know, but they smelled better. And there was another set for the pull-out couch along with a comforter. I went downstairs. Radar was sitting at the foot, waiting for me. I dropped the bedclothes on Mr. Bowditch's easy chair and saw that I'd have to move it and the little table beside it to pull the couch out. When I moved the table, the drawer came partway open. I saw a litter of change, a harmonica, so old most of the chrome finish was worn away, and a bottle of carprofen. That made me happy because I hadn't liked to think of Mr. Bowditch ignoring his aging dog's discomfort. And it certainly explained why the pet pantry lady had been so willing to sell me more. What made me less happy was realizing the medication wasn't working very well. I fed her, sticking a pill from the new bottle in her food, reasoning the stuff I just bought was fresher and maybe more powerful. Then went back upstairs to get a pillow for the rollout. Radar was once more waiting at the foot of the stairs. Jesus, you gobbled that fast. Radar thumped her tail and moved just enough for me to get by her. I plumped the pillow a bit, then dropped it on what was now a bed in the middle of the living room. He might grouse about, probably would, but I thought it would be okay. Pin care for his fixator looked easy enough. But I hoped there was something in home care for dummies about how to get him from the wheelchair, which I assumed he'd arrive in, on the bed and back again. Oh, to the bed and back again. Okay, so just one or two things I want to point out from this text. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be familiar with a word like grouse. It says here, he might grouse about. So this is a good chance for us to try to figure out, what does this word grouse mean? I'm actually not too familiar with this word. I might have heard it, I might have read it in a book a time or two before, but this is a good chance when we can guess what grouse means, to grouse about. Perhaps it means to move around without any particular aim or with any goal, just moving around, just to be in different places. Now, of course, we could look this up in the dictionary, but I think in this case, it's best just to guess from the way that he's using it what this word might mean, so that in the future, rather than try to memorize the word, when we have a similar situation, we might just use that phrase. Oh, so what did you do today? Oh, I was just grousing about in my house, which just means moving from place to place, perhaps, right? Grouse about. So that's one phrase I think might be useful to include in your vocabulary. Even if you don't know exactly what it means, you can kind of guess the meaning, and that should be good enough. Another word you could guess if you didn't know it was gobble. Jesus, you gobbled that fast. Of course, Jesus is just an expression of surprise in this case. He was surprised and he said, you gobbled that fast, talking to Radar. Of course, you could probably tell that gobbled must mean eat, because he had just fed Radar. So gobble must mean to eat, and perhaps to emphasize eating a large amount or eating very quickly, right? Because it says, you gobbled that fast. So in this situation, it's easy enough to guess what that word means. But more importantly, it would be good for you to use in the future. So even now, you could make an exercise of thinking about, when was the last time you gobbled something? Or that would mean to eat very quickly or in large amounts, right? Maybe I had only 5 minutes, so I gobbled up my ice cream cone yesterday. You could think of it that way. Another word he used was, I plumped the pillow a bit. I plumped the pillow a bit. Well, now, of course, usually we use plump as an adjective. And when we say something is plump, it means that it is full and round. Full and round. So to use plump as a verb would be to make something full and round. Of course, To make a pillow full, you'd have to put something more into the pillow. So it doesn't exactly mean to make it full in this case, right? But if you can imagine, if a pillow has been laid on for a long time, it might become flat, right? And then if you sort of pat it on the sides a bit and at certain angles, it might become round again, like a pillow should be, as more air gets into it. So in this case, it would be not full of anything but air, but to plump a pillow is to make it sort of full, round, and soft, but just full of air, right? So it's not flattened. That way, when you lay your head on it, it's a proper cushion. So that's another word you could use. I plumped my pillow. I can't think of too many other things that you can plump in that way. But certainly, if you do something, you sort of tap something or you hit something to make it a little bit bigger, a little bit rounder, or a little bit softer, that would be plumping something. All right? So let's move on. What else? What else? Stick the old bedclothes from the guest room in the washer. But that could wait until tomorrow or even Monday. A phone. That was what else. He'd need one close at hand. His landline was a white cordless that looked like it belonged in a TCM Cops and Robbers movie from the 1970s. The kind where all the guys have sideburns and the chicks have puffed up hair. I checked to make sure it worked and got a dial tone. I was putting it back in its charging cradle when it rang in my hand. I yelped, startled, and dropped it. Radar barked. "It's okay, girl," I said, and picked it up. There was no button to accept the call. I was still looking for one when I heard Mr. Bowditch, tiny and distant. "Hello? Are you there? Hello?" So, no accept button and no way to check who was calling. With a phone this old, you just had to take your chances. "Hello," I said. "It's Charlie. Mr. Bowditch?" "Why is Radar barking?" "Oh, because I yelled and dropped the phone. I was holding it in my hand when it rang." "Startled you, did it?" He didn't wait for an answer. "I hoped you'd be there because it's Radar's dinner time. You fed her, right?" "Right. She ate it in about 3 gulps." He gave a hoarse laugh. "That's her, all right. She's gotten a little shaky on her pins, but her appetite's as good as ever." "How are you feeling?" "My leg hurts like damn hell, even with the dope they're giving me. But they got me out of bed today. Dragging that fixator around makes me feel like Jacob Marley. These are the chains I wore in life." He gave that hoarse laugh again. I was guessing he was pretty stoned. Read the book or seen the movie? Okay, so we'll stop there for a moment. Just to make sure you understand the general context of the situation. Okay, so of course, he is not only cleaning the house, but preparing the house to make it more convenient for Mr. Bowditch when he returns. And so he wants to make sure that, of course, he has a bed to lay in, a place to stay, and make sure that everything that he needs is close by, especially the phone, right? So as he's moving the phone and checking it out, because it's one of those old-fashioned phones, what we now call a landline, not a smartphone or a cell phone, he was not familiar with how it worked. And so he was very surprised when it rang in his hand, and even more surprised when all he had to do was pick it up and then he was having a conversation. Of course, normally when we look at a smartphone, when it rings, we kind of just look at it and see who's calling. And if we don't know who's calling, we just don't accept the call, right? But in this case, the old days, back when I was young and Mr. Bowditch was younger, people just called people and you just had to pick up the phone. And like he said, you had to Take your chances. Mhm, mhm. So now, toward the end of this page, he makes some references. He says, dragging this fixator around makes me feel, and then he get this reference of Jacob Marley. It makes me feel like Jacob Marley. Okay, so I don't want you to be confused by that. He's referring to a character in a very popular story called A Christmas Carol, A Christmas Carol. And basically, you might know this story. In A Christmas Carol, the main character is Mr. Scrooge, and he is a very mean person, and he doesn't have the Christmas spirit. He doesn't want to give to anyone. He's very selfish, and he starts off this way until he is visited by three ghosts over the night. And through those visitations, he's changed and he becomes a very happy and generous and patient man. Of course, you probably know this story, but the person who comes to warn, well, I should say the ghost who comes to warn Mr. Scrooge about the visitations he's about to have, his name was Jacob Marley. And when he came dragging chains, right? So when he says, it makes me feel like Jacob Marley, he's saying, okay, this fixator makes me feel like I'm dragging chains like the character in A Christmas Carol. And of course, to show that he got the reference and he understood what he was talking about, Charlie says, "These are the chains I wore in life," quoting something that Jacob Marley said when Mr. Scrooge first saw him and noted the chains. "These are the chains I wore in life." So in this instance, basically, it's kind of funny because this young man is showing Mr. Bowditch that he has read the book or at least seen the movie. And so that's why we end with him asking, read the book or seen the movie, right? That question basically means, basically, are you one of those smart people who read lots of books and that's how you know this character? Or did you just see the movie like everybody else who knows this story? Even you may have seen the movie A Christmas Carol, right? So that's what they're talking about. Just one word or two words I might point out. Of course, he used the word "I yelped." Okay, I yelped. When the phone rang in his hand, he yelped. Now, surely you can guess what that means. The word is suggesting the sound. Yow, 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 right? I yelped, right? It's very similar, if not the same thing as saying I yelled, right? To yell is to scream unexpectedly or to raise your voice, but not necessarily saying anything, but just raising your voice and making a loud sound. And of course, we know it has the similar meaning or the same meaning as yell because he actually explains later to Mr. Bowditch that the dog, Radar, was barking because I yelled and dropped the phone, right? He says, I yelled and dropped the phone. So here we could see that these two words must have the same or similar meaning, yell and yelped, right? So we don't have to look it up. We don't have to check the dictionary. We just know, we can kind of guess the meaning of the word. And one more word, just in case you haven't heard this before, you probably have, but a horse laugh, right? He gave a horse laugh. Now, this is spelled horse like the animal, but notice that it sounds like horse like the animal, but notice that it is spelled differently, right? It is spelled Horse. And that word, can you guess what it means? Okay. Now, if you probably can't guess what it means, but you might know what it means already. But if you don't, notice that it's not very important to the story. So you don't really have to stop to look this up, right? You can just kind of let it go, even if you can't guess what it means. Maybe as you see the word a few more times and understand the situation, then you can guess what it means. In this case, I think you can imagine What a man who's staying in the hospital and who's on drugs and probably isn't very strong, what his voice might sound like, or what his laugh might sound like, right? So when we say hoarse, in this case, what it really means is rough, rough, very rough and scratchy. So someone who is feeling strong and maybe awake and lively and has been talking a lot, their voice is very clear. But if you've been sleeping a lot, perhaps you're very weak and you haven't been talking much, your voice might be very hoarse, like this, hoarse. And so even when you laugh, it might not be a regular laugh. It might be a hoarse laugh, like, right? So this is what you should be imagining when he says he gave a hoarse laugh, right? So back on to our discussion about A Christmas Carol. Moving on. Movie. Every Christmas Eve on TCM. We watch a lot of TCM at our house. Don't know what that is? He wouldn't, of course. No Turner Classic Movies on a TV equipped with nothing but, what had Mrs. Sylvius called them? Rabbit's ears? I'm glad I got you. They're going to let me come home on Monday afternoon, and I need to talk to you first. Can you come to see me tomorrow? My roommate will be down in the lounge watching the baseball game, so we'll have some privacy. Sure. I made up the pull-out couch for you. Also, the bed upstairs for me. And stop a minute, Charlie. A long pause. Then, is keeping secrets in your repertoire, as well as making beds and feeding my dog? I thought about my father's drinking years, his lost years. I'd needed to look after after myself a lot of the time. One more time. I'd needed to look after myself a lot of the time back then. And I'd been angry at my mother for dying the way she did, which was stupid because no way was it her fault. But you have to remember, I was only 7 when she got killed on the goddamn bridge. I loved my father, but I was angry at him too. Angry kids get in trouble. And I had a very able enabler in Bertie Bird. Bertie and I were okay when we were with Andy Chin, because Andy was kind of a Boy Scout. But when we were on our own, we got up to some fairly outrageous shit. It was stuff that could have gotten us in a lot of trouble if we'd been caught. Some of it police-type trouble. But we never were. And my father never knew. Never would if I had my way. Did I really want to tell my dad that Bertie and I smeared dog shit on the windshield of our least favorite teacher's car? Just writing that down here, where I promised to tell everything, makes me cringe with shame. And that wasn't the worst of it. Charlie, are you still there? I'm here. And yeah, I can keep a secret, as long as you're not going to tell me you killed someone and the body's in that shed. It was his turn to be silent, but I didn't have to ask if he was still there. I could hear his raspy breathing. Okay, all right. Okay, so some good expressions here that I would like to discuss with you. But first, let's make sure we understand what's happening. They start off talking about the fact that Charlie watched A Christmas Carol on Turner Classic Movies, which is a cable channel. And of course, Mr. Bowditch doesn't know what Turner Classic Movies or TCM is because he's an old man with a very old TV that uses rabbit ears, right? But then as Charlie tries to explain what he's doing in the house, he's interrupted, and Mr. Bowditch asks him if he can keep a secret. And this reminds Charlie of his childhood, where he had done many things that he is not proud of with his not so nice friend. And maybe he had a good friend, and that good friend stopped him from doing many more bad things. In any event, he realizes at that moment that he has kept many secrets, and so he definitely can keep a secret. All right, and so that's basically what's happened here. And of course, there were some interesting words, though, that I thought that you might be able to use immediately if you have the chance to speak. Maybe you know these words, but just in case you don't, let's see. What do we have here? Repertoire. Just the way that I pronounced that might have been strange for you. So, like, if you were attending our book club, we would work on the pronunciation of that word, because just reading it will not enable you to actually say it, and you can't use it until you can say it. So that word is repertoire. Repertoire, right? It's a French word, so that ending is not pronounced the way that English speakers would pronounce an English word, right? It's pronounced repertoire, repertoire, right? Like a sort of TWA sound at the end. It's not exactly how French people say it, but we're not good at the French accent, so we just basically we reduced it to the word repertoire. And we use that French word because we really don't have an English word that meets that exact meaning, or at least not one that's well known. In any event, I'm not sure if you can guess what a repertoire is, but if you can't guess and you don't want to take the time to look at the dictionary, you could move on and you would still not misunderstand what's happening in this story. But since I'm here reading this story, I will explain to you, in case you don't know, that your repertoire is your group of abilities, or possibly your special abilities. All right, so you may have a list of things that you can do and do well. If you put all the things you could do well on a piece of paper, that would be called your repertoire. It's not unlike a resume. Like when you apply for a job, you fill out a resume or a CV, and it lists all of your skills and abilities, all of your experience, sort of selling you as someone that would be valuable to the company. Well, it's sort of like that, except that it doesn't really have to be on paper anymore. It's just the idea of a whole list of things that you do and can do well. That is your repertoire. So he asks, is keeping secrets in your repertoire, right? As well as making beds and feeding my dog. Obviously, he can make beds and he can feed the dog. That's what he's saying he's done. But he wants to ask if he can keep a secret, if he's good at doing that as well. So he uses this word repertoire. And actually, we do commonly use this. So it's good to include this in your vocabulary. It could be useful to you. What kinds of things are in your repertoire? Me, I'm an English teacher, right? I'm able to teach English in English, which is not an easy thing to do. I can say I can read. I'm not the greatest at reading, as you might guess, but the more I do it, the better I get, especially reading out loud. So that will be in my repertoire. I make videos, I write stories, all of the things I do, I can call that my repertoire. So what's in your repertoire? Now, if you're really, 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 really proactive about English, you're thinking about how you would answer that question and putting that sentence together and using that word as you do it, so that vocabulary becomes your vocabulary. But there were some other words or phrases here that I thought we might take a look at. Okay, so now you notice here he uses this word enabler. Enabler, right? You see that there. So let's read that sentence again. He said, I love my father. Oh, no. Oh, angry kids get in trouble. And I had a very able enabler in Bertie Bird. So, do you know what an enabler is? If you've had some experience reading English, then you probably know that the verb to enable is to make someone able to do something or to make yourself able to do something. That's the verb to enable. And so naturally, if you add er to that verb, it usually is a person. So an enabler is someone who makes someone able to do something. But the cultural context is a little bit different. The way we use it in American English, an enabler is someone that not only makes it possible, but supports and encourages someone to do something that they shouldn't do. The word became popularized with alcoholism because alcoholics would have to cut off friendships with people who enabled them to go drinking, right? So if you wanted to quit drinking because you're an alcoholic, but all your friends are drinking buddies, and every time you go out with them, they say, hey, here, have a beer. Oh, let's grab a drink. Let's do shots, right? They are enablers. They don't just make it possible for you to do something bad, they are encouraging you to do something bad, right? And so in this case, an able enabler is Birdie Bird. Birdie Bird is quite able to enable Charlie to do bad things because Birdie Bird was also a bad kid. But as we read further, it says, Birdie and I were okay when we were with Andy Cohen because Andy Cohen was kind of a Boy Scout. So what's a Boy Scout? Do you guys have the Boy Scouts where you are? I know in America, the Boy Scouts, it's an organization. It's not as popular as it used to be, but basically, it's a Christian-based organization where they take kids and they take them and teach them survival skills. Teach basically boys, teach the boys, young boys, how to survive in the woods, how to do very useful things with their hands. And in the process of teaching them these things, they're also teaching them the values of being a good person, good Christian values, they might say. And so a Boy Scout, when we call someone a Boy Scout, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are part of the Boy Scouts Association. In this case, it's sort of just a casual way of saying that someone is a good person or someone follows the rules, right? They don't do the wrong thing often. They more often do the right thing. So when we see someone like that, calling them a Boy Scout is a kind of, it's not really so much of a compliment. It's almost as if we are annoyed by how good they are. We might say, oh, he's a Boy Scout. So that's a cultural reference that could be useful to you. And you could think about whether or not you are a Boy Scout. Living here in Japan, I think most Americans would say that most Japanese people are Boy Scouts. Although sometimes I'm not so sure. But okay, so let's move on, right? So of course, Mr. Bowditch is about to entrust Charlie with a big secret, we can imagine. Charlie says he can keep a secret unless, of course, there is a dead body that someone he's killed in the shed. And of course, strangely enough, Mr. Bowditch is very silent after that, except for his raspy breathing, right? And of course, raspy breathing. That sounds something like it could be something similar to hoarse, right? So when I speak clearly, you don't hear any other sound but my voice. But when I rasp, my voice is rough in such a way that you hear lots of other things going on in my throat. Like, I don't talk like this. You can hear a lot of other things happening in my throat. Of course, if we're breathing, you shouldn't hear anything, right? not so loud. But imagine if you are having trouble breathing, you might breathe like that. Right? That would be a raspy voice or raspy breathing. So you probably could guess that. But even if you couldn't guess that, you wouldn't have to stop to check that word, right? You just keep it in your head and keep going. It's not so important to the story. Okay, so let's continue with the story. Nothing like that, but these are big secrets. We'll talk tomorrow. You seem like a straight arrow. I hope to Christ I'm right about that. We'll see. Now, how much am I in the bucket for with you and your father? Do you mean how much have we spent? Not that much. The groceries were the most. Couple of hundred in all, I guess. I saved the receipts. There's also your time. If you mean to help me, you need to be paid. How does 500 a week sound? I was flabbergasted. Mr. Bowditch, Howard, you don't have to pay me anything. I'm glad to. The workman is worthy of his hire. Book of Luke, 500 a week. And if things work out, a year in bonus. All right? Whatever he'd done in his working life, it hadn't been digging ditches. He was comfortable with what Donald Trump calls the art of the deal, which meant he was comfortable overriding objections. And my objections were pretty weak. I'd made a promise to God, but if Mr. Bowditch wanted to pay me while I fulfilled that promise, I didn't see any conflict. Plus, as my father was always reminding me, I had college to think about. Charlie, do we have a deal? If it works out, I guess we do. Although, if he turned out to be a serial killer after all, I wasn't going to keep his secrets for $500 a week. For that, I would take at least 1,000. Joke. Thank you. I wasn't expecting anything. I know that, he interrupted. An ace interrupter was Mr. Bowditch. In some ways, you're quite a charming young man, a straight arrow, as I said. I wondered if he'd still think so if he knew that one day while we were skipping school, the Birdman and I had found a cell phone in Highland Park and called in a bomb threat to Stevens Elementary. His idea, but I went along with it. There's a flower canister in the kitchen. You may have seen it. Okay, all right, we'll stop there for a moment. Just want to make sure that we get some of the phrases. But first, let's make sure we understand. Okay, so now Mr. Bowditch is actually trying to say that he thinks he can trust Charlie, but he's not sure about that, but he'll have to take his chances, right? And of course, now he's saying he wants to offer Charlie money, $500 a week to take care of him, which is quite a hefty amount, right? So when Charlie hears that he would be he would be paid $500 a week, he was flabbergasted. That word is flabbergasted. Okay, so now the only way you can master pronunciation of a word is to say it and to say it many times. So you must repeat that. Flabbergasted. 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 Right? And what does it mean to be flabbergasted? So I've never looked this word up in the dictionary. I only know this word from the context in which it is usually used. And as far as I can tell, flabbergasted is the perfect word when you are so shocked and surprised that you don't know what to say. And so instead of saying something, you're just, you are flabbergasted. Right? So I don't know what the dictionary will tell you, But I can tell you that that's what I imagine when someone says that they are flabbergasted. They are so shocked and surprised that they can't even speak properly. And that seems to be correct because after that, he sort of stumbles over his words. Mr. Bowditch, Howard, you don't have to, right? So he's sort of not quite sure what words to use and what name to use because he is so flabbergasted, right? So that's really the word of this lesson. That's a good word to take with you. And I would love for you to think of the time that you were flabbergasted. At our book club, if you should join, we don't have a problem with taking a moment to just discuss, oh, when was the last time you were flabbergasted, right? Like if I think to the last time that I was flabbergasted, yeah, you know what? I think it would have to be the first time that my now partner invited me out on a date. Of course, I didn't know it was a date at the time, but we had been discussing her English lesson. She was a student at the time, and she asked me to. I suggested that as a team building exercise with her coworkers, she should take them out and do something fun and exciting to make the team closer. And of course, she took my suggestion and invited all of the team, her workmates, to a horseback riding event. And of course, she also invited me. And I was shocked. I was flabbergasted. Of course, when I finally got my words back, I did accept. And of course, most of her coworkers dropped out by the time we had gone. So it ended up just being a date, and the rest is history. Mm-hmm. And so now that's how I would use the word flabbergasted. Think of a story where you might. Now, this phrase here, he says, the workman is worthy of his hire. Book of Luke. All right. So, of course, again, this is another Christian referencing. The workman is worthy of his hire. It basically means someone who does good work should be paid for what he does. The workman is worthy of his hire, right? If he can do the work and he does it well, then you should hire him and you should pay him, right? That is mentioned in the Bible. Which part of the Bible? The book of Luke, right? That is the part of the Bible called the book of Luke. The Bible is separated into the Old Testament is separated into several books. I guess you could say the New Testament is as well. Or several books put into one book. So the book of Luke is what he's referring to, that part of the Bible where that quote was taken from. So that is something I wanted to make sure you could understand. And I think maybe everything else you could probably guess. But if you can't, then of course you can join us, and we'll talk about it in person. But for now, we're moving on. Not only had I seen it, he'd mentioned it to me, although he might have forgotten. He'd been in a lot of pain at the time. There was money in it, he'd said, then said it was empty, said he forgot. Sure. Take $700 out of it, 5 as your first week's wages, and 2 for your expenses to date. Are you sure? Yes. And if you think it's bribe money, maybe sweetening you up for some outrageous request, it's not. Services rendered, Charlie. Services rendered. About that, you can be perfectly straight with your father about anything we might discuss in the future. No? I'm aware it's a lot to ask. Okay, I'm going to read that again because the way I read it was the tone wasn't right. So I'm going to try that again. It says, yes, And if you think it's bribe money, maybe sweetening you up for some outrageous request, it's not. Services rendered, Charlie. Services rendered. About that, you can be perfectly straight with your father. About anything we might discuss in the future, no. I'm aware it's a lot to ask. As long as it's not a crime, I said, then amended it. Not a bad crime. Can you come to the hospital around 3? Yes. Then I'll say good evening. Please give Radar a pat from the stupid old man who should have stayed off that ladder. He hung up. I gave Radar several pats on the head and a couple of long strokes, nape to tail. She rolled over to have her belly rubbed. I was happy to oblige. Then I went into the kitchen and took the top of the flour canister off. It was stuffed with money. There was a jumble of bills on top, mostly 10s and 20s, a few 5s and 1s. I pulled them out. They made a fair-sized heap on the counter. Below the loose bills were banded stacks of 50s and 100s. The bands were stamped First Citizens Bank in purple ink. I pulled them out too. It took some wiggling because they were really crammed in there. 6 banded stacks of 50s, 10 to each. 5 banded stacks of 100s, also 10 to a stack. Radar had come out into the kitchen and was sitting by her food dish, looking at me with her ears pricked. Holy shit, girl. This is $8,000. And that's not counting the stuff on top. I counted out $700 from the loose bills, neatened them, folded them over, and put the wad in my pocket, where they made a bulge. It was at least 10 times the amount of money I'd ever had on my person. I picked up the banded bundles, started to put them back in the canister, then paused. There were 3 little pellets in the bottom, kind of reddish. I had seen one of those before, in the medicine cabinet. I tipped them out and held them in the palm of my hand. I thought they were too heavy to be BBs. And if I was right in what I was thinking, it might go a long way toward explaining the source of Mr. Bowditch's income. I thought they were gold. Okay, all right. So let's go back one page, right? And just make sure we understand everything here. Okay, so now, of course, Mr. Bowditch's secret, or this first secret, which is really not much of a secret, but the first secret is that he has money in a canister, and he wants Charlie to take $700 to pay himself for his first week of service and for the money that he spent to feed the dog and to clean the house and to help out. Right, so that's $700. And of course, he opens up the canister, which is basically just a tall can, and he sees that there's handfuls and handfuls of money just crumpled up in there. And then beneath that, he sees that there are banded straight bills, straight from the bank, fresh from the bank, all banded together. He has like $7,000 in this canister. And of course, Charlie, being the straight arrow that he is, he doesn't take any of the fresh money. He just straightens out some of the $700 of the crumpled up cash and puts the whole wad in his pocket. Now that's a nice thing to do, I think. I probably would have thought of just taking $700 of fresh bills, easier to carry, But yeah, he actually counted up of all those 5s and 1s and 10s and sort of counted up a large number of bills that amounted to $700. I thought that was a very kind thing for him to do. Okay, so now I want to make sure that some of these phrases are understood, though. Like, for example, he says, about that, you can be perfectly straight with your father. What does be perfectly straight mean, right? You can look up perfectly and you can look up straight in the dictionary, and those two words won't give you the meaning separately. That's what an idiom is. In this case, straight doesn't mean going in one direction, but it does come from that meaning. And straight means honest. It comes from the idea of a straight line being direct, right? Not going out of the way or going in a different direction. No, it's straight. It's honest. You can tell the straight, direct, honest truth about that. So you can be perfectly straight. Of course, perfectly means completely. So perfectly straight is to be fully honest with his father. He's saying that about everything so far, he can tell his father anything. Be perfectly straight. But then he says, anything we might discuss in the future, no. That means you can't be perfectly straight with your father about anything in the future. Mhm. So, of course, now we can kind of understand the reference where he says, you seem to be a straight arrow, right? Basically, he's saying that you're honest. And straight in this case means honest or in good order. Mhm. So that's one thing. Let's see, were there any other words or phrases we need to look at? Okay, this phrase, I hope you know this, but if you don't, then it's good. It would be good that you do. He says, I was happy to oblige. Right? So, what does that word oblige mean? And if you can tell, it's kind of the root of a word like obligate or obligation, but it's not. The meaning seems to be something different, right? In this case, we would guess I was happy to oblige. It means she rolled over to have her belly rubbed. I was happy to oblige. I guess you might guess that it means I was happy to help or happy to do something. And that's right. If you guessed that, that's right. I was happy to do it. I was happy to do something for someone. In this case, oblige is to treat someone's request as if it is their job or as if it is their responsibility or their obligation, right? So oblige someone is to treat them as if they are the boss or to do what they say as if what they say is your job, right? I will oblige. So you might hear people say, I'm happy to oblige in customer service situations because it is their job, right? At the hotel or something like that. But you could also say that to your English speaking friends, right? Oh, I'm happy to oblige, right? If someone says, oh, on your way over, could you pick up some champagne? You could say, I'm happy to oblige. It's a very high level English way of saying, sure, right? Or, yeah, no problem. Mhm. Happy to oblige. Another phrase you might hear also is, I would be obliged, or I'd be obliged. It's another way of positively responding to a request. So, of course, when Radar rolls on her back, exposing her belly to be rubbed, that's like a request. And he responds to that request, I was happy to oblige. Right? So that's definitely a phrase that you can use and use immediately in the future. There might be some words or phrases that you don't know here that might also be useful, but for now, in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next and last part of this section. Yeah, okay. I think you could understand banded bundles, right? A bundle is a bunching or grouping of things. So a bundle of bills. Banded means wrapped with a band of some kind, usually a paper band or a rubber band. Mhm. Keep them together. So those were the banded bundles that he references there, right? Banded bundles of cash. Mhm. Mm, yeah, and just so in case you know, we may have discussed the past lesson, but he said he saw there were three little pellets at the bottom, kind of reddish pellets. Pellets are very small balls, small balls. Pellets can be BBs, which we use as a sort of a gun that wouldn't kill someone, right? It just has small balls instead of bullets. So the BBs are pellets. So any small balls, I would say smaller than a pill, right? A pill is like medicine that you can swallow, right? A ball that's even smaller than a pill might be called a pellet. Mhm. And so he thinks that these small pellets are pellets of gold. But we will discover more about that next time. And so I do look forward to seeing you next time. And again, do sign up and we can take this offline. We don't have to record this, but if there is no one here, then and no one is paying for this service, then of course we will have this as a recorded section. Unfortunately, live streaming is no longer an option. If you want to join the next recorded session, it will be at the same time next week. Of assuming that no one has signed up for this event, then certainly you will be able to click on a link to join this group for free if we do a recorded session. And I'll send a notice out to all Real English Party members. So certainly you should join the group. It's not an expensive event, but if you don't have the time or don't know if you can do it or just don't have the money, well, it's certainly possible that if no one does join, I do want to read this book for myself. So you can join for free, but if you do that, it will be recorded. So you would have to either be willing to be on camera and have that taped, or perhaps not turn your camera off but have your voice recorded. Okay, so you are welcome to join though. You can join for free this time at 3 o'clock on Tuesday if no one else joins the group before then. Okay, so hopefully I will see you soon. In the meantime, please do be sure to take part in the Real English Party of Life that's right out there. See you next time. Bye.